get to say welcome to Real Talk, another podcast. I was about to say another profile, which is true because we're profiling someone else from the community. On my left, I've got Dr. Mary, and further left, of course, is Vana. How you doing, Vana?
I'm doing good. I'm happy to be back. It's been a minute.
I know you kind of like been ghosting us, right? So,
Me?
yeah, you've been ghosting us. You know what it took for us to get you here? We had to
So hard.
so very hard. Our guest today is Dr. Mary.
Thank you very much.
How you doing?
I'm fine, thank you. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
Oh, it's a pleasure. This has been almost, is it about 9 months in the making? Because you
Oh
talked
my
to us.
Lord.
Yeah, because there's a little backstory. We talked to her for just before Essence and Culture,
Okay.
right? And I think I was on the phone and I said, yeah, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do this. And then it didn't happen until now, right? But everything in good time.
Oh yeah.
Yes, there's your first time for everything.
There is, there is. I just got a couple of events to talk about. I'm going to start with Heritage of Spanish-Speaking Countries. And this takes place on September 22nd between 12 to 4 at Museum London. So what it is, it's something very new to London. It's the London Latin America Heritage Month, and it's obviously in the month of September, and they've got two great events. But the first one, like I said, we're going to talk about is the Heritage of Spanish-Speaking Countries, and this takes place at the museum. Once again, it's on Saturday, September 22nd, right? 12 to 4. It's music. It's got a lot of exhibits. So let's go learn something from our Latin American neighbors. And big shouts to Dario and the Simple Reflection of the Artist. They're part of the creative process of this. So I'm looking forward to it. Also, this Sunday, September 8th, got to send a big shout out to London Black History Coordinating Committee. They've got their annual barbecue. It's a barbecue. It's a party. It's and it's at Springbank Park.
Hey.
Yeah,
Nice.
12 to
Nice.
4. 12 to
Nice.
4. It's just a good time. Come out and support the London Black History Coordinating Committee. I will be there. Are you gonna?
I'll mark my
I'll be
calendar.
there.
Yes,
I'll be
mark
there
it.
now.
I'll mark my calendar.
And I gotta send big shouts to DJ Wickham. He is supposed to, but I'm gonna do my best DJ Wickham impersonation, right? Because right now he's in Europe, so
Yeah, he's enjoying life.
Yeah, he's enjoying life, right? And when he comes back, he's gonna be on the podcast and letting us know about his European adventures for the last 3 weeks, right? Once again, it's so nice to have you.
Thank you, thank you. Happy to have it that you've had me on.
Oh, and you're a doctor.
Yes.
What are you a doctor of?
Thank you. So I'm a doctor because I have a doctor of philosophy. I'm not a physician, but I work with physicians.
Okay. And in 2017, right, in a video, you said London is a good place for students, right? Yeah, I actually looked, I actually listened. I'm like, all right, why is London a good place for students?
Yes, so I think I also did mention in the video that I'm saying that as someone who's not had, that much experience in other cities, but in and of itself, regardless of whether I'm comparing with other cities, I found London, first of all, London is synonymous with the University of Western Ontario,
Yes.
now rebranded as Western University. I had a great experience, and I say that as somebody who was once an international student. Yes, I was raised in Saudi Arabia. I was born in Nigeria. I celebrated my second birthday in Saudi Arabia. I went to a private school where they had a British education, so I did the O levels and A levels. And one good thing about that was that I didn't really have any academic challenges transitioning from, studying in Saudi Arabia to studying in Canada, because I believe the systems like metric systems and whatnot were similar. So, that was my perspective. Another thing I felt was it was not as noisy as some neighboring cities.
Okay.
Rent was reasonable. I remember when I became a graduate student, I recall that for some of my colleagues who entered graduate school, living costs was something to factor, especially on a student stipend. And then at the time of the video, I was a graduate student. I was a PhD student. So in terms of preference for studying in a certain city, it's a vector of things. Living was one of it. The education as well. So I think I was coming from that perspective.
Okay.
It's funny she says rent is affordable.
At the
That
time.
might have been back in 2017.
Yes, and relatively speaking, I know rent has gone up. I mean, even if London is now pricier, neighboring cities like Toronto would only be so much more
Oh,
pricier.
definitely. Toronto is,
So yeah, this is more in a comparative context.
That makes sense.
Before we get into your schooling, I'm gonna touch base on the fact that you did O levels and A levels,
As Caribbean people.
as Caribbean people, because when I did O levels, right? So I'm familiar with that experience. But let's go even further back from Nigeria to Saudi Arabia to London. So let's start with Nigeria, right? Take us through your
Very early childhood.
Yes,
early childhood. So I was born in Nigeria, which is in the west of Africa for some of our viewers. I was born in the city called Ibadan. At the time, it's, and I think it still is the largest city in West Africa. My mom was a retired physiotherapist. My father, who's late now, was a naturopath. So back in the day, and I'm talking 1990s. I was born in 1990. Saudi Arabia was very welcoming to foreigners, to expatriates, to foreign workers, to build their workforce. That still is the case now, but over time it's become, the situation now is more of their people are constituting the workforce, but they're still, it's still a country that attracts a lot of expats. So I think, they talk about right place, right time. My mom was a very qualified physical therapist, pediatric, and she specialized with, pediatric patients. She, got an opportunity in Saudi Arabia. And it was quite a process because even though I left when I was 1+, I got to know a little bit later in life that there was actually a process. At the time, we didn't have emails, we didn't have a lot of things. So it was quite a sojourn for my mom. It's a sojourn for me, but it was also a sojourn for my parents. And yeah, she got an opportunity, she came. And yeah, that's where, I don't have memories because of my age, but I do have memories of going to Saudi Arabia, going to Nigeria in the summers. Okay. The good thing about Saudi Arabia is typically on average, the work package, the employment package is such that they do give you a lot of time in summer, paid, to go to your home country and whatnot. So my memories of Nigeria, I think, is more on the summer holidays, which I do recollect going when I was either 2 or 3. Then we went to the States for the summer holidays. I'm talking of the yearly summer holidays. Then in '96 we went and whatnot. So yeah, so that was the Nigerian part. And yeah, I was raised in Saudi Arabia. For the longest time, when people would ask me where I'm from, I would just say Nigeria. And that is not incorrect, but I thought it was a better description of myself to kind of throw in I was raised in Saudi Arabia. Because I'm no psych major, but I did take a lot of child psychology at Western. And the critical period, the sensitive period, these are established phenomenon in psychology. So I wouldn't want to take away from, I wouldn't want to omit that by not mentioning the fact that I wasn't raised in Nigeria. Yes, my parents are Nigerian, Yoruba to be specific. Both my parents are Yoruba, but I was raised in Saudi Arabia. And even though Saudi Arabia doesn't give nationality, as many of the Gulf countries and as most countries, but it's just part of my growing up. Growing up. To
me, I always say I'm from Trinidad. I was born here, but I grew up in Trinidad for 10 years. Yes. That's when all my growth happened. So I get that.
Interesting, and that's a whole conversation in and of itself, identity, and it's a whole conversation in and of itself. But I think a consensus we all might have is it's a vector of things. It's not just one thing.
Okay. How long were you in Saudi Arabia?
I celebrated my second birthday in Saudi Arabia. Right after turning 18, I came to Canada.
Oh, okay. Nice. Okay.
Reasons for coming to Canada?
Great question. So that too is a vector of a lot of things.
Okay.
At the time, for the most part, Saudi Arabia is a peculiar country. Besides not giving nationality, there were rules that foreigners couldn't study in their universities for the most part. So my mom so that was one reason. Another reason too was my mom wanted quality education. She herself is an alumnus of the University of Manitoba.
Okay.
And she saw back in the day, well before I was born, and she saw the value of having Western education, a Canadian education, from multiple perspectives, both from the perspective of, I remember what my mom would tell me when she was a young therapist, a young physical therapist. She kind of saw how, kind of saw the opportunities and the doors that were open for her contemporaries that had a Western qualification. And as somebody who also worked in Saudi Arabia, part of the reason she got her job in Saudi Arabia was obviously she was an amazing physical therapist, but also that Canadian experience contributed to, it's like someone having a degree from Harvard. It may not be the deal breaker, but it contributes. So that was one thing. Plus she kind of felt that, Saudi Arabia, the infrastructure is very first world-like. So, I mean, there was the option to study in Nigeria, but then she kind of thought that, just to continue that, and obviously she could afford it, thanks to Saudi Arabia. So yeah. So that's one of the reasons why I came to Canada.
Do you visit Nigeria?
I haven't been in a little while, but Nigeria is a place, if someone describes, I do have an idea of what the country is like. I used to go in summer holidays, and I had a great time. My uncles and aunts did a great job ensuring that we had a great time. The last time I went was quite a while ago, but hopefully in the near future I'll be going. There are some security issues, so my mom felt it was a little safer that I don't come for the meantime.
So your mom is back.
She's in Nigeria at the moment.
Okay.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
I got two questions. So
Sure.
coming to Canada, nonetheless a great decision, but was it mostly up to your parents?
Great question. So they had a say. Maybe to answer the short answer to your question, yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay,
yes,
okay.
yes.
But
yes.
you agreed with it, of
Yes,
course.
yes, I agreed
Okay.
with it, yes.
And then how is your career path now and what you are? Was that influenced by what your parents do?
Yes and no. Or let me just say it was an amalgamation of my idea and it was a marriage of my idea and their guidance.
Okay.
Yeah, I actually wanted to study medicine, like when I was really, really young.
Yeah.
I'm talking about maybe like 6 years old. They ask you that question, what do you want to become when you grow up? And I was like, I want to be a doctor. And I kept saying that for the longest time.
You manifested it.
Yes, not just me. Well, in a different way,
Yeah.
different way, but yes, eventually, yes. So that the thought that I was going to pursue medicine actually influenced the O-level and A-level subjects that I took.
Okay.
So for O-levels, I did, chemistry, physics, biology, English, math, the sciences. And then for A-levels, interestingly, at the time, when I looked at the top schools in the UK, because there was kind of an option for me to study in the UK, but my mom kind of waited and said,
Canada.
just do Canada.
Come to Canada.
So I did look at A-level has kind of evolved. So A-level at the time, and I think is still the case, was broken into AS and A2.
Okay.
Yeah, but because O-levels is, you study 2 years, you write one board exam, a couple of papers. A-levels, you study 2 years, write a board exam, a couple of papers. But A-level is a little, or at least the stream of A-levels I did, because there's all sorts of, you have GCSEs, you have GCEs, but it's all that whole British, yeah. So I took the subjects for pre-med. So in England, Great Britain, and many parts of the world, you enter medical school right after your A-levels. I'm sure in the Caribbean, you don't have to have a degree.
No, no.
I mean, maybe excluding the U.S. schools, but in many educational systems, you don't have to have a degree before entering medical school. So I pursued my A-levels as if I was going to enter medical school a year from then. But then the option of Canada came, there were some family influences, family decisions, family issues here and there. So by the time I entered Canada, my A-levels helped because I did get exemption from first year. My grades were good, so that kind of helped, saved on tuition, and saved time as well. So I thought, okay, let me just do a good pre-med, and I chose biochemistry.
Okay.
I loved chemistry. Chemistry was actually my favorite A-level subject, and I specifically liked organic chemistry.
Oh gosh, I wish I was you back in university.
Well, I must give credit to my teacher. I mean, my A-level teacher, who was also my O-level teacher for chemistry, was just amazing. Sometimes I feel an educator can be very influential.
Oh, definitely.
And that's
it's
why
to make or break for a course.
I believe so. I believe so. If I didn't have the teacher I had for my O-level and A-level chemistry, I may not have pursued biochemistry at the undergrad and master's level. So I liked biochemistry, and my reason for choosing biochemistry was as a child, I've always been fascinated by science. Not only have I always been fascinated by science, I've always been fascinated by the human body. I'm a believer. I believe in a higher power. I believe in God. As someone,
You're saying that in the right place.
Okay. We're in this PC political correctness culture. I'm glad I can say it. I'm a strong believer in God. You can never go wrong believing in God and following Him. So of all of God's creation, the human body was always, I would say, the most fascinating. I have a fascination for astronomy. I was having a conversation with my younger brother the other day saying that, if I didn't have to worry about getting a job, I think if I had to go back to school again, I may have had like a separate major on just astronomy. I actually love physics. Yeah, physics, planets, and all that stuff.
You just have a love for learning.
Yes, knowledge. I love seeking knowledge. Anyway, going back to medicine. So I always had a fascination with the human body, and I wanted to know the body at the most simplest level possible, and I thought biochemistry was it, because even of the medical sciences, I think it's at different levels. You've got physiology, you've got anatomy, you've got cell biology, but I feel biochemistry was that simplest level. And biochemistry ties into pharmacology. It ties into everything.
So many things.
I think if you have
the building blocks.
Yes, that's how I see it. DNA, Krebs cycle, glycolysis. All that is you can't go simpler. You can't go more fundamental. So I thought as a pre-med, I mean, I was looking at it at the time more strictly from a knowledge and interest, and that pretty much was the impetus throughout my bachelor's and master's. So going from my bachelor's to my master's, this is another thing that I learned: never to assume. I was on another interview by one of my former students, and if there's anything I would educate people on is, in life, just never make assumptions.
And where is this realization
coming from? Okay, great question. So when I was in my third year going to fourth year, I was like, okay, let me look at the process for medical school. I was, on Dean's honor roll and everything. And then when I looked at I was having this conversation with my mom at the time. When I was looking at the requirements, yikes, you had to be a permanent resident or a citizen.
Oh.
Unlike the U.S. See?
I didn't even know that. That's not fair.
That's in the U.S. I mean, I know so many individuals who are not American green card holders nor American citizens and practicing and studying medicine in the U.S. So I think there was an assumption on my parents' part, well, more on my part. I mean, I should have maybe looked at things earlier that, in the U.S., your citizenship has nothing to do with your education as long as you can afford the tuition and stuff. So I think I carried that assumption into the Canadian system.
I would too.
And so I kind of learned from that when making a life decision, even if you're hearing, don't base it solely on what people said. Look for the information yourself. That was one lesson. So I was like, yikes. And, you know, the process was such that, I mean, even if my mom had put in stuff for permanent residence, I wouldn't have made it for the, you know, if I'm, you know, assuming I got in as well. So my mom was like, you know what, in the interim, just do your master's. I had good grades. And I mean, that was not the only reason though for pursuing my master's. Regardless of the whole, regardless of the whole citizenship PR issue at the time, I really started, you know, having a love for science. And, you know, I didn't bother writing the MCAT because at the time medicine is great, but then I remember saying this to my master's supervisor at the time when I was interviewing to get into his lab, that medicine is an art, and I mean, it's an essential art. We need physicians, and the sciences is pretty much without the sciences, medicine is crippled. So, if when a doctor uses a stethoscope, that is a product of the field of bioengineering. When a doctor diagnoses cancer, that is a product of the field of pathology. So the sciences are just as important as the medical field. So I think I embraced that new philosophy or that new way of thinking. And, you know, that gave me the impetus to pursue graduate school, to pursue knowledge at that level. And, you know, my master's was an interesting journey. You learn a lot. You know, I think to every story, there's a good, bad, and ugly. And then, you know, I completed my master's. Now, between my master's and PhD, I did have a bit of a break. First of all, I was burnt out because it had been a marathon from kindergarten to my master's. I had no break. So I was just burnt out. I just needed a break. And I did have the opportunity to pursue a PhD in biochemistry, but then I thought of so many things. So like a few minutes ago, I was talking about how I was thinking strictly from the knowledge and the interest. But as time went by the time I was done my master's, I was like, okay, what's going to get me a job as well? It's okay to pursue something that will get you a job. There's nothing wrong with the finances being a motivator. I just don't think it should be the motivator.
Money's not everything. Money's really, and it comes and goes.
It comes and goes. Financial management is a whole topic in and of itself. So, like I was saying, you know, there's nothing wrong with it being a motivator. I would just advise someone that it shouldn't be the motivator. So, so I still had I was still in that, you know, pursuit for knowledge, pursuit for interest. I just now added marketability and job stability to it. So you can like something and pursue it for the financial, because life costs money.
Yes, it does. I'm realizing this now.
It'll be nice if life didn't cost money, but life costs money, fortunately or unfortunately. So you can't ignore finances in what you do. But that being said, you know, the finances aside, it was a bit of soul searching. I was in Canada at the time. I went back to Saudi Arabia, so I had gotten my work permit. There were these, you know, one thing Canada is good for is there are nice structures and systems in place to, you know, transition into a permanent resident and eventually a citizen. I'm a Canadian citizen. I became a citizen in 2021.
Nice.
Yeah. So
congrats.
Thank you. That was quite emotional for me, and because you know for people who were like not born here, it's you can take it for granted.
I think only one of my friends is from here.
Okay.
Everybody else is going through the struggle, so I get it.
Yes. It's a journey. It's a journey. Yes. So I thought of so many things. I had my work permit, so that gave me flexibility. So I was back in Saudi Arabia, got to spend some time with my mom. And because she was still working at the time, she was a head physical therapist. She had been promoted to a head physical therapist. She was actually a head physical therapist before I left for Canada. So so at the time, I was like, okay, what am I going to do with my life? I don't know if I really want to do medical school at this point.
Right.
So
this is before your PhD.
This was right before my PhD. Yeah. Okay. So I finished my master's in 2013 and started my PhD in 2015. So so apart from resting, I decided, you know what, I'm going to seek mentors. And that's another thing, another lesson number 2. That's another lesson.
Telling me, go find a mentor.
Mentor, yeah. So when and you know, I also remember saying that at the other interview my student had me on, that seek mentors. There are many advantages to having a mentor, and one reason, or a strong reason, I so much believe in having a mentor is, you know, a journey is synonymous with a path. When you have someone who's already walked that path, there's just certain knowledge, certain insights that they can provide for you. And this is what I said earlier in an interview, that it's important in life. I believe we all have our destinies. We all have something, we all have things we're here to achieve. I believe that in life, it's important to distinguish between people that are, you know, people that love you and people who can actually be mentors. So for example, say you have this best friend or a parent or a relative who's loving and caring. Don't automatically put them in that position of mentorship just because they're loving and caring, because they just may not have that specific capacity to guide you to your destiny.
Right. Yeah, I think that's actually very valid, because I think I've done that with my mom my whole life, and now I'm reached a point where she is just very
she's loving,
different
she's an amazing person, but she just may not have that capacity to guide you to your destiny. So I think one needs to even come to that realization first, because that was the case for me. Right. So I was like, you know, like, okay, I can't do this on my own. And another thing I remember learning at a church program was, we, you know, as children of God, as people with destiny, as people with purpose, achieving certain things is predicated on connections, is predicated on people. I remember a pastor saying, the answer to any of your prayers is in the hands of somebody. If you really look at it, just think of anything you're praying to God for. The answer actually lies in somebody's hand. So people are necessary in this game of life. So I came to all that realization, and I connected with, so in Saudi Arabia, we did have a Nigerian community, and, you know, my family was known in the community and whatnot. So I thought to myself, let me reach out to, you know, an elderly person, a person, you know, in the line of science. So I came across a very renowned professor in Saudi Arabia. Interestingly enough, he was, I'm not going to mention his name, but he was head of dentistry in Saudi Arabia. So he was an MD, PhD. He was Nigerian. He was MD, PhD. He had studied at Harvard. A lot of Saudi dentists today have gone through him. Like if you go to Saudi Arabia and you go to dentists, like top-notch dentists for that matter, and if you mention their name, they either have heard of him or were taught or you know trained under him. Yes. So I just happened to, you know, look up his email, and I just say, hi, I'm the daughter of so and so, because like I said, we were there was a Nigerian community, and he gave me audience, which I'm very, very grateful for. And you know, I found my way to his office. It was in I think Riyadh Dentistry College. I found my way to his office, and you know, the rest is history. So he gave me a lot of advice. So one thing he said, another you know, knowledge I pass on to people is, when taking a decision, you want to factor in perspectives including those that you feel may not concern you now. Where was he going? He was saying, you're a lady. At the time, I was 24. So he was saying that you want to choose a career that will be one that you can thrive in if you're, you know, say get married, you know, become a mother, or even you know, change countries. So, and again, I wasn't a Canadian citizen at the time, nor a PR. So he was saying that if you do a PhD in biochemistry, nothing wrong with that. But, you know, given your circumstances, for a lack of a better word, you may not end up living in Canada, you may end up living in Nigeria, you may end up living in Saudi Arabia. You're better off with a public health degree than a PhD, than a life science PhD degree. Because he was looking at it from the perspective of every country has a Ministry of Health. Yeah, I mean, like if I was a Canadian citizen, he may not have said that, because you've got the research infrastructure here. Because in developing countries, the research infrastructure, for the most part, is not like what it is here. Therefore, certain careers might be, you know, maybe not, one may not thrive in certain careers on average.
He made sure you were essential.
Yes.
No matter where you go.
No, exactly.
That's awesome.
Yeah, you worded it perfectly. So he was saying, and he said yes, because he said that, yes, you're 24 now, but I think he was not only talking to me as a mentor, but he was also talking to me like a father. because he wasn't looking at it strictly from the professional. He was like, you want that work-life balance. And the good thing with public health is, you know, as if he could see the future, you could work remotely. You don't have to be in a lab where you're standing. So if you're like married and you're, so if you're married and you know you're pregnant, you can conveniently work from home. But if you're in the lab, you've got to stand. You might be exposing yourself to fumes. You know, these are things to just factor in. And I was like, yeah, I actually didn't factor in, even though I wasn't thinking of getting married at 24. But, you know, I do plan to get married and have kids down the line. So, you know, yeah, so that was the, so I gained that knowledge. I gained that wisdom in life. When you're taking a major decision, factor in perspectives, including those that you feel are not too relevant in the now. Yeah. So, and I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good. I want to touch on that one point of that. You had your Nigerian community, yes, but you did not know this man. And you just reached out to him.
Not too well, because I mean, he knew me when I was a kid, so I probably, Because when I told him who I was, it's like, oh, I know your parents, blah, blah, blah.
It takes a lot of confidence and like nerve just to go up and reach out to someone. You know, exactly.
Thanks. It's God. It's God. And I think it was also that point in my life. I wouldn't say I was in a bad place, but it was like, I believe there's I believe there's just so much I can do, and I want to make it right.
The words that you were saying right now is where I am. Like I've just graduated, and I'm
congratulations.
Like, what? Thank you.
Health science or nutrition?
Nutrition, yeah.
Okay.
Honors dietetics.
Congratulations.
I'm soul searching. I'm like, what
soul
now?
Searching,
and you're giving me the answers in this podcast. It's
Thank
amazing.
you, and hopefully the knowledge helps other people. Thank you.
Hopefully it does.
No, thank you very much.
But it's helping me.
Thank you. It's God. I give all glory to God. You know, I believe God is a force. Because you know, I could have sent him that email and he may not have responded. Exactly. So I think that's where the God factor comes into play. And I just came from a Christian like spiritual retreat, and I like how the pastor said something. This is another lesson that even if God has promised you something, or if there's a prophecy regarding you, or if you've got a great destiny, you have to partner with God. He talked about partnership. You know how we partnership with people? He was talking about partnering with God, because sometimes, I mean, he's a very well-learned pastor, and he was saying that some people are like, oh God, why hasn't this happened? Well, what have you done to contribute? Even if God says something's going to happen, you have to work in that line.
My grandparents' famous line was, God only helps those who
help themselves. Right? Yes, heaven helps those who help themselves. Exactly. Yes. So, but you see, it's an amalgamation of the two, because you can do all the work and you still, you know, need that God factor to bless it. So belief, faith, faith, even more so now, because things have gotten so competitive. I mean, if there are 10 applicants and they're all good, I think it's the God factor that comes into play. But you got to be good to start with.
Exactly.
So I remember this professor, this dentistry professor, saying that he said, if for whatever reason you can't do professional school, because he, first of all, before he went into the public health, he did say, do professional school. He's like, you can't go wrong with professional school. And he's also someone that studied in the States. He's like, you can do dentistry, you can do nursing, you know, something professional. And I was like, you know, and then he was like, okay, if for whatever reason you can't do professional school, whether it's finances, whether it's not having the citizenship, PR, whatever the reason, do something in public health. So you could do public health, you could do epidemiology. So it was pretty much those two. Because there are doctoral programs in public health where you have like a doctor of public health, or you can do like a doctor of philosophy in epidemiology, like I did at Western University. So he said, do something in public health, because when you're an epidemiologist, like I said, we're just not licensed, and maybe, who knows, that might even change soon. When you say you're an epidemiologist, it is a very specific thing, unlike being a biologist, for instance. Nothing wrong with biologists, but it's quite broad. But epidemiology is specialized. You do certain things. There's certain things you can do.
And that takes us to the question of the difference between dermatology and epidemiology.
Yes. So I'm an epidemiologist in the field of dermatology. So dermatology is a specialty within medicine. Epidemiology, so I'll give a definition of epidemiology. There are many definitions of epidemiology. Epidemiology is the scientific study of determinants of health in populations. It can also be defined as the analysis of determinants of health in population, in a summary. So with epidemiology, so if you do a doctoral program in epidemiology, you have like a basic education, but then you have some sort of specialty. So my specialty from my thesis was my doctoral dissertation pretty much married the fields of health services research, primary care, and health economics. But because we all have a basic training, I got a job at the dermatology clinic, and I was able to apply things from my basic training. So what I do is more on the evidence base. So there's in epidemiology, you have clinical epidemiology, you have you have chronic disease epidemiology, you have mental health epidemiology. So these are more like the this would be more synonymous with the specialties in medicine. So if you have an MD degree, you pretty much have the training to start a career in pediatrics or start a career in orthopedics. So that is kind of my situation with my epidemiology job, where I do more of the evidence-based in the field of dermatology. So for instance, one of the papers I published with my boss, we published it in the JAMA Dermatology. JAMA is the Journal of the American Medical Association, where it got featured in CNN Health.
Okay,
I might pass on the information, yeah.
Please do, yeah.
Yes, it got featured in CNN Health, and I mean, as an article, not as a video. And what I did was to, along with my team, I supervised the team, was to look at the relative efficacy of drugs for male pattern baldness. So male pattern baldness is just the medical term for balding in men. You know, it has a couple of synonyms, including androgenetic alopecia, pattern hair loss, male pattern hair loss. So what I had done was to systematically review the literature, collate information from the literature, and do some fancy statistical analysis to come up with a rank of most efficacious to least efficacious based on published data, based on published literature. So this is more clinical epidemiology, you know, but I had that training from the basic training.
Right. And this was one of the first studies you've done, or no?
Oh no! By the time we published our work in JAMA Dermatology, we had published a couple of articles.
Oh, okay.
I can pass on my CV to see.
I would love to read it. Yeah, because a lot of these words do make sense to me just because I've now graduated. But I'm sure, like,
did you do like an intro to epi? Did you do an intro to epi?
No. Well, a lot of nutrition just ties in.
Okay.
Clinical nutrition, it just ties in with like skin. Like, you can know from the color of your tongue what they have, or like skin redness, rashes, whatever the case may be, right? Even your nails.
That's true.
And even that's something you specialize in as well,
nails,
right?
yes. I do some nails. I have colleagues that are more on the nails, but my boss assigned me more on hair, but I have done work in nails with onychomycosis. We published a paper in the British Journal of Dermatology. It's one of the top journals for on dermatophyte toenail onychomycosis.
Ooh,
and I also
lovely.
did. A lot of people are affected by that condition. It's one of, if not the most common nail disorder that for which dermatologists are seen in the clinic. So the technique I used is meta-analysis. You know, it's a popular, you may have heard the term. Meta-analyses can be pairwise or network. Your pairwise meta-analysis is your traditional, you're comparing A versus B. Network is you're comparing at least 3 or more. I kind of, you know, when I hear pairwise versus network meta-analysis, what comes to mind is your t-test versus ANOVA. Your t-test is for the 2,
oh my God, it's so
ANOVA, and ANOVA is for 3 or more, analysis of variance.
Even for your line of work and like just knowing how it affected a population or determinants of health, right?
Based on published data.
Be a lot more efficient for you guys, right?
Yes. Because I like that you use the word efficiency, because clinical practice guidelines, even though we don't do wet lab stuff, given the volume of information, we're in an age of information, and the literature just, you know, both peer-reviewed and gray, just keeps getting pumped with more and more information. So, you know, it is now, you know, I can see why, you know, people can have a profession or a career just sifting through that information. There's a science or a modus operandi to dealing with information. And a meta-analysis can be described as that in a nutshell, because, and in peer-reviewed journal, a meta-analytic study is considered original work, even though, you know, there's no wet lab, but it's like you're coming up with new information based on specific analysis of existing information. And journals recognize that as original work. And what I was also going to say is, you know, in the field of medicine, The field of medicine always gets updated, and I have physician colleagues who always look for who always pursue their continuing medical education, their CME credits. That's because there's always new information coming out. There's always new data coming out. Meta-analysis have a place there because if a meta-analysis found, say a certain finding came out of a meta-analysis, and maybe other studies corroborated that, medical guidelines can be updated. Okay. And on the pharmacy side of things, a lot of times it is epidemiological studies that contribute to the withdrawal of drugs from the market. For instance, yes.
Because that's a lot, you would see physical signs.
Yes, yeah, so adverse events. So there's a branch of epidemiology called pharmacoepidemiology. And as a matter of fact, a few days ago, our team just published a paper on low-dose oral minoxidil.
Okay.
And low-dose oral minoxidil is used, some physicians prescribe it for hair loss in men.
Okay. Okay.
However, an adverse event or a side effect of it is pericardial effusion. There's been some associations. There had been case reports that made it to the peer-reviewed literature. So my boss decided that, okay, let's design a study. Let's use existing information. So the United States Food and Drug Administration adverse event reporting system, you might have heard of the FDA as a nutritionist.
Of course. I feel like a lot of people have.
Would have, exactly. So they have what they call the adverse event reporting system. So it's abbreviated as FAERS. Okay. So FAERS is a database that's freely available with spontaneously reported data. So if someone experiences a certain side effect, they report to FAERS. Okay. So FAERS has collected this over decades, and this data source, but then not everyone knows how to analyze that data source. I kind of learned on the job, but with my background, that was not too hard to do. Because during my doctoral dissertation, I had worked with big data. So we had analyzed the FAIR data, examined the FAIR data, and we had some findings, and the Journal of Cosmetic Dermatology accepted our paper. And one study may not be enough to withdraw, to lead to actions, whatever the action may be, whether it's withdrawing a drug. However, it contributes. Like historically, there's this agent called DES. I forget it's quite a long drug. That's another thing in epidemiology. People often talk about the randomized control trial. For those of you who are physicians or in health methodology, you probably would know about the hierarchy of evidence, cohort study, cross-sectional, randomized trial. Randomized trials are considered like the gold standard. One thing, my education taught me, and my work as an epidemiologist taught me, is that you can still have valuable, salient science from observational evidence. For example, and I think pharmacoepidemiology becomes part of that discourse. Historically, back in, I think maybe the 1970s, I think 1972, there was a paper published in the New England Journal of Medicine, that's like a top journal in medicine, where there was a case control study. So that was, even with the cohort design, you've got prospective cohort and retrospective. Right. Prospective is supposed to be higher evidence than retrospective. So there was a case study with an N of 8. That is a sample size of 8, and a sample size with a sample size of 8. Sorry about that. Sample size of 8, and there was a finding, and that finding alone is what withdrew. This agent the abbreviation is DES. I think it's diethyl estrobistrol, something. It was used for women for preventing miscarriages, but later it was discovered that it was a teratogen. DES. It's a famous study. So
that's terrible.
But luckily that was identified through a case-controlled study with a sample size of 8. It was not randomized. It was a very small.
Is 8 enough to prove something like that?
That's a good question. In epidemiology, we don't really use the word prove. We just say in support of.
Okay. Yeah.
Where I think epidemiologists are a bit sensitive. I mean, outside of epidemiology, I understand.
I
But
low-key offended you. I'm sorry.
no, you didn't. No, you didn't.
No,
I
no,
probably
yeah.
would have been saying that if I didn't go through epidemiological training. I think when you go through a graduate program in epidemiology, especially a doctoral program, you don't look at the word cause the same way anymore.
I get that.
We at best we say strongly associated with, or things like that. So what you're saying, I think this DES study could also be a case of serendipity. I mean, if major decisions were to be taken, I think this was more an outlier, but the evidence was just so there was that study, and I think there were a couple of evidence that buttress or corroborated that finding.
Right.
But I think the point there was good science or helpful science can come from observational evidence.
Of course, but do you think it's better than a randomized trial? Because if the person who's running the study and the participants don't know, isn't that the least biased, most accurate results that you can get?
That is very, what you said is on point, very textbook.
Yeah, that's what I've learned,
Yeah, very textbook. Now when it comes to, so in the evidence base, you have the efficacy evidence base, but you also have evidence base on harm. And if we go back to the Declaration of Helsinki, you cannot randomize people to harm. So sometimes certain questions cannot be answered with the best study design on grounds of ethics.
That makes so much sense. And
so this is where so this is where observational evidence becomes useful. And also in the history of medicine, we have the Framingham Heart Study. I don't know if you've covered that in nutrition.
Never.
So the Framingham Heart Study, I mean, my master supervisor was a cardiologist, or specialized in cardiology. So when determining risk factor for cardiovascular disease, a lot of cardiologists or physicians would use what they call the Framingham Risk Score. That tool is pretty much a product of epidemiological work, long-term prospective cohort studies. For in the field of, in study of diabetes and scholarship of diabetes, you have the UK PDS study, and out of that study came the measurement of HbA1c, the glycated hemoglobin A1c.
Right.
So all that was from prospective studies, which are not randomized trials.
Okay.
Yeah, it's best practice to measure your, you can measure your fasting glucose, you can measure your glycated hemoglobin A1c, because epidemiological studies had shown that they were of prognostic value.
Right.
Yeah, so a lot of good science can come from observational data, and I think my realization of that was more pronounced through my work. Work, yeah. You finish school, there's no end to learning. You learn up to a point, but then work, especially if you're working in your field, just gives you more knowledge and insight.
Yeah, and that's literally what I need, because you can hear the difference between what I have directly learned from school and your experience, and how you value that.
Yeah.
I have.
But you will get ahead. I think the fact that you know certain things, I think when I was at your stage, I don't think I knew a lot of what I knew now. You'll get ahead.
Russia's doing a good job, and they closed down. They don't even exist anymore.
Russia, okay. Oh, they've merged with main campus.
Yes, they have.
Oh, okay.
100 years of all-girls school.
Oh, geez, yeah.
So on this line of studies and getting results and researching, how do you know what is true and what isn't in the sense of research? Because medicine, nutrition, working out, it's all very controversial.
It can be.
We look at the endless debate of butter and margarine, right? And we still don't have an answer of which one really is better right now. Butter is on top, but who knows?
Right.
So how do you know what is actually right? If I look up my fungus on my finger, is it going to come up as cancer?
Right. That's a very good question. And not only is that a good question, I would even say that's $1 million question.
It's unanswerable.
Well, it's. I think when it comes to questions, we can only have more information.
Of course.
And more information is better than no information.
You definitely have more than me.
Like I say in a lot of my papers, that some information is better than anecdotal. Because even when, if for whatever reason we're not able to have, a high quality cohort study, and we did a cross-sectional study, in the discussion of my papers, I always say, well, it's better than anecdotal. So to go back to your question, would we ever know? How do you know if something is true? I think I'll go back to, I think was it levels of evidence? I remember in an intro epidemiology class, they were talking about, in science, how you have hypotheses, you've got models, you've got theories, you've got law. But I remember my professor saying there's nothing called truth in science.
That's fair.
Because if we look at the evolution of the atomic model, if we go back to O-level physics, and we look at the evolution...
No, don't take me back there.
If you look at the evolution of the atomic model, it's very interesting and philosophical how truth is perceived.
Right.
Interestingly. So we had the Dalton model, then the blueberry muffin model, then we had the quantum mechanics model. So I think when it comes to truth is what is considered truth at the respective point in time. But as new knowledge comes, some knowledge might displace older information. Or if we look at Newtonian physics and Einstein's physics, Einstein came up with certain, I'm not a physics major, but I love my A-level physics. I think when new information comes up, it may not necessarily discard the former. I think I'm speaking more on a philosophical level than I'll go specifically.
Which is great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it may not necessarily discard. I remember the Nobel Prize winning discovery of statin drugs. So the statin drugs, if I'm not mistaken, are HMG-CoA reductase inhibitors. Okay. No, it works with the LDLR pathway. Anyway, the drugs for that reduce cholesterol. Low
density lipoprotein.
Yes,
guys.
low density lipoprotein. Yes, it was a Nobel Prize winning discovery with Goldstein.
Yeah.
In the 70s or 80s. So when they were elucidating cholesterol metabolism, for the longest time they thought it was one thing because it appeared to make sense.
Okay.
But with further experimentation, deeper experimentation, they not only came up with what the real pathway was, they kind of understood why they thought that made sense.
Okay.
So what I'm saying is that one thing this whole journey and of academics has taught me is even if something makes sense in the moment, don't get too carried away, because you can discover something that made you realize, I now see why that made sense, but that really wasn't it. Right. But I can see why it made sense.
Keep an open mind.
Keep an open mind.
Yeah.
So with Goldstein's Nobel Prize winning discovery, they elucidated the pathway for cholesterol metabolism, LDLR. There was the LDLR receptor with metabolized LDL cholesterol, the bad cholesterol, and they got a Nobel Prize winning. And out of that Nobel Prize winning discovery came blockbuster drugs, statins.
Oh.
So you have this atorvastatin, lovastatin.
Yeah.
That's a product, directly or indirectly, of Goldstein's Nobel Prize winning discovery.
Oh my God.
So to tie that to what you were saying, when it comes to truth, what I would say is we can try our best. So as an epidemiologist, you try as much as possible to ensure validity. So, validity, generalizability, all this, validity, reliability, generalizability comes into play. I don't think there's a straight answer because, yes, we may have knowledge and the knowledge might be enough to work with, but that's not the end of it. There will be more things to be known about a topic. Like we've been studying cancer for a long time. We've been studying heart disease for a long time. Yeah. There's always information. Like with genetics, when we unraveled the human genome, we then came with epigenetics.
Yeah. There's always another level.
Yeah. So I think we can have answers, but the answers may not be absolute. The answers may not be exhaustive.
And that's
but they can be
but
they can be comprehensive enough to solve problems.
Exactly. Human nature is to keep wanting more, to keep learning more, right?
Yes.
And on that line, we have 5 minutes left. I want to know what's next for you.
That's a really good question. I think I'm at that stage where I'm trying to pursue personal. I think I'm still, on the go in the professional life, but I'd like to settle, get married, have children.
Wow, you're only 24. What are you talking about?
I'm not 24. I wish I was 24.
No, but that absolutely does make sense. Yeah. Are you planning to stay in Canada?
The thing about a life partner is I don't know who my life partner is.
That is fair.
I'm just, I like Canada. Canada is home for me. Nothing is, besides my job, nothing is tying me too strongly to Canada. Yeah. But your life partner, when you get married, that can change a lot of things.
You never know, exactly.
Yeah, and and as a person of faith, I just just envision it, and
they will come when time is ready.
By the grace of God.
Yeah. Is there one last thing, not a last thing per se, but before you marry, have kids, whatever the case may be, is there one thing you would like to accomplish before that?
That's interesting. I'd like to publish a couple of books.
Okay.
I mean, I have published things. I've published dissertations and peer-reviewed articles, but I'd like to publish a couple of books.
A whole other level.
Yes.
Based on? Have you thought about it?
I've actually thought of one. There's one I've been working on, but I've not been doing a good job keeping an eye on immigration.
Immigration?
Yes. I've been talking to very, very close friends. Because I'm the kind of person, I don't talk about things until it's materialized, but sometimes, it doesn't hurt to discuss with a couple of people, also because I can get ideas. So immigration, because if there's one thing my life is synonymous with, is immigration. I think I was reading a sociology book, and I realized that there's such a word called third culture individual. And I realized I'm a third culture kid. I'm a third culture individual.
Can you define that?
So the way the book defined it was, if you were born in one place, your parents are from one place, but you spent your critical and sensitive period in another place, but then you spent your later adolescence in another place, your culture, your identity is a little mixed. You would you would be a second culture, because your parents were from one country and you've been here and grew up here. And also in development, the brain still develops, the prefrontal cortex still develops up until 26. So the fact that I came here when I was 18, I was still developing. And I had changed or migrated, while I was still developing. I mean, I was developed to a point, but I was still impressionable to some degree.
Of course.
Yeah. So I want to talk about, I have been talking about immigration. I've actually been gathering data. I am an adjunct faculty at the University of Ibadan in Nigeria. I'm an adjunct faculty. So I try to leverage that position to get information. I did conduct a survey. The data is sitting there. I'm just trying to find time to analyze the data. But I would like to write a couple of books, one being on immigration. This is what I believe about life. Life, for the most part, is a consequence of decisions. And, whatever our reality is now is, to a good extent, a consequence of decisions we've taken prior. And the decision to immigrate is a non-trivial decision. My question, rhetorically, is how informed are people when it comes to the decision to immigrate? And I think what pronounced this interest in me was my students. I teach international students. The branch of Fanshawe College I teach at is exclusively international students. And I just wonder, there are a lot of them. Besides their education, immigration is at the back of their mind.
Of course.
And I'm always just curious. Are you doing it because everybody else is doing it? Or are you doing it because you have some strong reasons for doing it?
We touched on this in a previous podcast with a couple of foreigners. And the one thing they told, the guy was from India, and he was like, nobody really told me what it was going to be like when they came here. They just showed me their car, they showed me their house, but they didn't talk about the mortgage that came with it.
I think I need to follow up with you on that. I need to
pull it
off camera.
Podcast.
Maybe when the book is out, maybe this will now motivate me to finish the book.
Yes, we're all looking forward to it.
Yes, because another thing that pronounced that interest is when I will hear from close loved ones, if I knew abroad was this way, I would not have come. And I used to get goosebumps when I would hear that, because I'll ask myself, what you're saying implicitly was your decision was not informed, or it was misinformed, or underinformed. So
it's funny. The last thing I'll say, because I know we're close, but when we asked on Canada's Day, how do you define Canada? What is Canada? We talk about Italy, and it's like, oh my God, pizza and the pasta, and the culture is just so definite. What is Canada? What defines it? And honestly, there weren't much answers aside from hockey, maple syrup,
poutine.
Poutine, but we really, I understand it's a melting pot, but there's, how do you inform someone when you don't even know what you're living in, essentially, right?
Yes.
But that's a whole other deeper question. I think we're gonna wrap up there. Thank you guys for tuning in.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you,
I'm
Dr.
so appreciative.
Mary. I learned so much today.
Thank you very much. I'm happy. Thank you.
And we will see you guys next Tuesday.
Bye.